one. We're live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tuition Reimbursement and Transportation, our January webinar for Special Education Legal Fund. The featured sponsors for tonight's webinar are the Pinnacle School and the Spire School. The Pinnacle School enables students in grades 2 through 12 with complex learning challenges and secondary co-occurring needs to thrive through small class sizes, individualized academic programming, active problem solving, and relationship building. The Spire School is a private therapeutic day school for college-bound students in grades 6 through 12 that integrates individualized curriculum with health and wellness, enabling students to overcome social and emotional challenges in a nurturing environment. Both the Pinnacle School and the Spire School are located in Stamford, Connecticut. Both are Connecticut-approved special education programs and are part of the Greenwich Education Group. Thank you, Pinnacle, Spire, and Greenwich Education Group for your support. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the rest of our corporate partners. Without their friendship and support, so much of what we do would not be possible. I'd like to acknowledge WealthSpire Advisors at the Platinum level and Winston Preparatory School at the Gold level, as well as at the Silver level. We are incredibly grateful for the support of Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, Eagle Hill School, American School for the Deaf, and Chapel Haven Schliefer Center, excuse me. Finally, for those of you who are not familiar with us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Special Education Legal Fund. I just realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Christine Lai, and I am the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund, which was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we've provided over $1.2 million in grants for legal support and advocacy support to over 250 families across 80 school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. We do this primarily through two grants programs: the Attorney Grant Program, which provides families with a $6,000 legal support grant from a qualified special education attorney, and an Advocate Grant, which provides families in need with a $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. We have just closed the January grant cycle today. The portal will be open on January 23rd for the February grant cycle. And for more information, you can visit our website at www.spedlegalfund.org and click on the button that says Apply for Grant. I just want to highlight our next webinar, which is coming up in February. This is not on the Eventbrite. It's not up yet, but I wanted to highlight that we are going to be exploring high school readiness. High school, are you ready for it? With educators from Winston Preparatory School, Villa Maria School, Eagle Hill School, and more. This webinar will take place on Wednesday, February 19th at 7 p.m., just like this one, and you will be able to register eventually through the same Eventbrite link through which you registered for tonight's presentation. Next, I want to mention that on Sunday, March 30th, from 2 to 5 p.m., SELF will be hosting our second annual resource fair in partnership with our friends from Special Education Equity for Kids, or SEEK, and also in partnership with the Stanford JCC. This is a really exciting event which brings dozens of resources for families with children with special education and special needs to, to come and learn more about what's available in their community to support their child, either on the education side, on the legal side, advocacy, therapy, after school, et cetera. So we're really excited to bring this resource fair and it's, and our partners back to the JCC in Stamford at 1035 Newfield Avenue. New this year, we're going to have 3 panels: an attorney panel at 2 o'clock, a school panel at 3 o'clock, and an advocate panel at 4 o'clock. So those are going to be 3 new additions to this year's resource fair. We also have a limited number of exhibitor tables that are available. You can learn more about that, in our Eventbrite page, the same way you had registered for this event. And sign up now because we are looking forward to seeing everyone. It's free, but you need to register on Eventbrite for this event. Finally, we're here. We're really excited to welcome Paul Barger back to this webinar series. This is Paul's third, I think, time on a SELF panel. He's previously shared expertise on outplacement, what is outplacement, as well as the topic of residential outplacement. And Paul is a really great resource, particularly in the New York area, and a great friend of self as well. He also, fun fact, Paul is a huge hockey fan, although maybe we've maybe not the team that that we prefer in our household, but it's fine. So welcome back, Paul.
Thank you.
Next, we are excited to welcome Andy Feinstein back to his sixth, I think, go round in the self webinar series. I think that makes you the chip leader. You and Jeff Forte, I think, are battling out for the title. Andy has previously appeared on webinars, including obviously outplacement multiple times, state complaints, year in review, mediation and due process, as well as obviously this panel tonight on tuition reimbursement and transportation. There really isn't much that Andy doesn't know about special education, and we're really grateful for his support, both of us, this webinar series, particularly as his support and friendship goes back to when we were really nothing and just an idea. So thank you, Andy. Andy was also fun fact, the recipient of our 2023 President George H.W. Bush Disability Advocacy Award that was presented at last year's anniversary gala. Thanks to the work that he's done for COPA as well as SEEK. He's an incredible advocate for children and families in the special education system in Connecticut and New York and beyond. So welcome back, Andy.
Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, I'm so excited to welcome Lara Damashek to the panel. Lara wears a ton of hats. She has great depth and breadth in her experience. She's a former SPED attorney, an advocate, currently a CSE representative at the Windward School, and as well as being, chair of Special Education Legal Fund's board of directors. She's worn many hats on behalf of self as well, and actually has appeared as moderator for this webinar series 8 times, which is more than anyone else besides me. But this is your first time, I think, as a panelist. So that's exciting. Welcome. So, because it's time for the disclaimer, this webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York or the state of their residence to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear. So here we go. We have just to take care of some housekeeping, we are covering 2 topics tonight for our panel, for our attendees. We're going to start with tuition reimbursement, and then we're going to move to transportation. So apologies to those of you who are only on here to listen for transportation. You're going to have to wait a little bit. So just to start, we've obviously tackled the topic of outplacement or out of district placement on a few times in this series. And tonight's webinar is going to discuss the process of seeking tuition reimbursement after a unilateral placement at a special education school. So can someone start us off, kick us off by talking about the legal background for tuition reimbursement?
Well, pretty simply, it comes out of the Burlington case and subsequent cases, which holds that it's the duty of a school district to provide a free appropriate public education. If they fail to do so, the parents can unilaterally place at an appropriate placement and get reimbursement for that placement. Note the test. The test is first, second, third, and fourth. You have to prove that the program provided by the district did not meet the educational needs of your child. And just to sidelight on that, you need an expert to do so. There is no exception to that rule. There is no exception to that rule. you need an expert to do so. Um,
So
and
just
what
to reiterate that, you need to have the proof that your program provided by the public school is inappropriate for your child, as well as number two, the expert opinion that the new placement is better and or the existing placement is
no,
insufficient.
no, the first test is you have to prove that the district program is inappropriate.
Mhm.
Um, and then if and only if you demonstrate that, do you get to show that the program you're placing in meets the educational needs of the student. And that's, one of the wrinkles that happens on that is that, the parent comes in and says, well, my kid needs an Orrin Gillingham reading program. The school's not providing it. It's an inappropriate program. But then wants to place the student at a school that doesn't provide an OG program. That
Mhm.
obviously doesn't work.
Mhm.
Um, the placement needs to provide that. Now
Reflective
let
of
me
the need.
just let me say a couple more things. One, districts can place kids out of district, and they do so for medically complicated kids. They do so for behaviorally complicated kids. They do so for kids that the staff wants to get rid of.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and an IEP placement at a private school is obviously much better. The district pays every penny, pays all transportation, responsible for the program, and that is clearly the better solution
Mhm.
if that's possible. Um, if so that's if that's not possible, then one needs to go in and demonstrate that the school program is inappropriate.
Mhm.
Now, I don't want to monopolize this, but let me just one more little piece. Um, in most districts, and certainly in Connecticut, um, 95, 98% of these cases are settled without going all the way through a hearing.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, and are through a negotiated cost sharing arrangement, the amount that the district's willing to pay is entirely a product of how likely they think they are to lose a hearing.
Mhm.
If they think that they can win, they're not going to pay much. If they think they're going to lose, and that the parents are actually going to go through with it, they will pay more.
Mhm.
And so, while you certainly need the expert to win at a hearing, you also need the expert if you're going to go in to negotiate with them,
Mhm.
because that is what makes them feel vulnerable. That was make them feel like um, they're not going to succeed. Uh,
Okay,
one
so
last one
sorry,
last
go
wrinkle
ahead.
of all this is there are cases where the district says, um, we're going to place the student at this, um, reform school, basically.
Mhm.
The parent says, no, 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 I want my kid to go to a structured, supportive place. In that case, the burden remains the same. You have to prove that the program they're proposing is not appropriate, does not meet the needs of the student. Um, and But the target there is not anymore the school district program. It is the program that's being offered by the district.
Paul, can you talk about address why a parent would um, not seek an IEP placement versus, having to unilaterally placing their child in a school and then seeking tuition reimbursement after? I know you've
Yeah.
obviously walked through a lot of these cases and
Yeah. I mean, I would say, there are a few different scenarios, but there's two primary scenarios where you're proceeding with unilateral placement and seeking reimbursement. The first is, and some of this is along the lines of what Andy's saying, if the district, if your PBT or the CSE is not agreeing, they don't agree to place the student out of district, you feel that the program I can't stress enough also the need for expert support, but your team and you as parents have decided that the district's program is not appropriate. You're placing in a private school, and then you're seeking reimbursement. And then a very common scenario also is that the district agrees to place out of district. The family disagrees with the placement. It's the placement that's been selected or the placement that's available. Then the family's placing in a different private school program and seeking reimbursement for that. That second scenario, it is, at least in my experience, it's much more likely in that scenario that the case gets settled and for a good amount because the district, as I like to say, the district's already put money on the table. It's
Right.
logical.
And has already agreed in principle that.
Yeah, they're saying they can't meet the needs of the child. The district may have secured an out-of-district placement, but they're a lot less. And again, they're willing to spend money on the student. They're willing to spend money for the placement, and so it's just for practical reasons. That's a case that typically does settle, and also settles for a good amount of money. I would just add to that, though, the third prong of this test, right? The unilateral placement test. We talked about the first prong being the appropriateness of the district's program. The second prong being whether the program selected by the parents is appropriate, the Orton-Gillingham example that Andy gave. The third prong is equitable considerations. Did both parties act reasonably? Did one party act in an unreasonable manner? What becomes very important for
That's
the
a great point.
family.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really important for the family here in that second scenario where the district has decided to place the student out of district and the family wants to place the student elsewhere to a non-approved program. It's extremely important for the family to cooperate with that district IEP process, to operate in good faith, to consider the options the district has presented.
To go visit the program.
To do the intakes, to ask questions. Because I like to say to our clients, the easiest way to lose a settlement or to lose at a hearing, not cooperate with the process, because they can go to the hearing officer, they can go to an administrative law judge and say, we did everything we were required to do under the law. The family is not playing ball. The family is not going along with the process. And so it's extremely important to give real consideration to whatever it is that the district's proposing. And then if there is an honest disagreement, again, with expert support and talking to your team, then when you move forward with the unilateral placement, you've checked the boxes, you've worked in good faith, and you're doing everything you can then to meet that third prong of the test.
Let me just add one thing on the third prong, which is, we lawyers, when we're doing a lot of litigation, try to withhold information and make the other side fight for it. Don't do that in this case. Yep. Give them everything you've got. The worst thing is that a piece of evidence shows up at a hearing that the district hasn't seen before. Mm-hmm. That's like admitting that you haven't been cooperating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about the expert witness, the expert testimony? That's something that, obviously, I'm repeating myself all the time, but, talking about the importance of, an evaluation, in terms of determining what the students, what the appropriate placement is and where the student is and where they need to go. Can you talk a little bit about, expert testimony? Because both of you have mentioned it. And, I think that, people on the call would love to hear a little bit more about what that means.
Let me just make it very simple. The law talks about a free, appropriate public education. Nobody has a clue what the word appropriate means. The Supreme Court called it cryptic in the Rowley decision. And the courts have basically decided that in order to testify credibly on the issue of what is appropriate requires an expert. There's certain things that require an expert. I mean, if you're challenging, a product liability case, you need an expert to talk about how the product doesn't work. And so, a lot of parents come forward and say, look, the kid's not making any progress. Isn't it obvious? Mm-hmm. That's sadly not good enough. And the other thing I see a lot is parents come with an expert who describes in gory detail the disability of the child, but never talks about the program. Mm-hmm. And remember, the test is, did the district offer an appropriate program? Mm-hmm. That's what we need expert testimony on. Mm-hmm. Now, the nature of the disability may demonstrate that to some extent, but that's the ultimate question that you need expert testimony on. Paul?
I mean, Andy, we're very like-minded. I mean, that is we at our firm, and it sounds very much like this at your firm, is if a family won't go get an expert, we will tell them that we really don't feel that they would be able to prevail. It would be impossible because the decisions that the family makes, to us, it really needs to be that the family's making this decision based upon the advice of a professional. It's not the family. It's not that the
It's not the
family.
family's driving,
Yeah, it's the
desire.
family. It's, like, of course a family has preference, and of course a family always wants what's best for their child. That's not the standard, though.
Right.
That's not what it is. It's not what's best or better for the child, and it's not what the family wants. And of course, we're going to always have people say to us, "Yeah, but that's what we want for our child. That's the school that we want." But that's not what the standard is. We need that the expert is saying this program that the district has offered is not appropriate. It's not reasonably calculated to provide
And
meaningful
this other
engagement.
program that the
Exactly.
expert's recommending and that you also have looked at is appropriate.
Right. These are the recommendations, and then we're able to say whether they name the program or not. But these are the recommendations. This is the type of program. These are the supports and services that the student needs, require. Like I always say, we live in the world of three words: needs, requires, and appropriate. The words are not best or better. It's not maximizing potential. It's not preferences. It's needs, requires, and appropriate. And you need an expert, and maybe multiple experts to support that. It's the only way to proceed with a case.
And let me just say, I don't,
Laris, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I don't love this. I got a call from a mother the other day, and she said, wait a second, I have to pay $7,500 for an expert that I'm not going to get back in order to get my kid an appropriate program, a free appropriate program. And we could talk about IEs and all that, but I basically said that's the bottom line. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't love this. I mean, this is not fair. And it's particularly not fair to people of limited means. I'm sorry, Lara.
No, I was just going to say, maybe it's obvious to some of the people on the call, but when we talk about an expert, like what comes to mind very often is like someone like a neuropsychologist who can really provide, who can do testing and have data. I think that's the data that's so key, because we need some, you could say your child isn't making progress, but it's, the standardized, the achievement testing, all those types of, objective measures that are going to mean something in court, right? So it's, yes, it is something that is very costly, a neuropsych evaluation, but I also say, as an advocate, as I've said to many friends, like, I think, something like a neuropsychological report is one of the best investments you can do for your child, especially when you're at a crossroads. And and
let's face it, we are at a crossroads. If this is what you're looking at, you're at a crossroads.
I mean, ideally you had it already. So it's like you have a baseline of where, someone evaluated your child maybe back before they were, not doing well.
Or in crisis.
To compare. Yes. So I would just say, I mean, for me, it's like, I think the ideal expert is typically a neuropsychologist, but are there other ones that come to, I know I'm not asking the questions this time, but are there other experts that you like to see, Andy and Paul? I'm just curious.
Well, that depends what the disability is. Depends the need for the placement.
So like
maybe
a speech and language.
Maybe a speech pathologist. It may, in physical cases, be a PT or
could be a BCBA. Could be a
BCBA. It could be It could be a speech language professional. It could be somebody who's like a reading specialist. I mean, usually the neuropsychologist is obviously doing a lot of language-based testing. But yeah, I mean, if we're, sometimes we'll have testing done by the neuropsychologist, and they'll come back and they'll say, you really need to drill down on certain language pieces, and they'll recommend as part of it doing a speech language evaluation. So then we'll get a speech language therapist to come in for the language piece, and for the additional language piece, and we might have both of them as experts then.
Let me talk about one really tension point here. Okay, you've got a duty to cooperate. You get your evaluator to do a serious evaluation. You go to your CSE or PPT meeting with your evaluator. The district then says, oh, what do we have to do to make our program appropriate? And it's your duty to cooperate, to provide all the information, but it's not your duty to write an appropriate program for them.
Right.
And
that's your job.
And so it's often a real challenge for parents, and it's also can be a real challenge for experts who want to fix things, who want to tell the district how to make things right.
Right.
And,
well, only if you did this or you did that.
Take away your case from you.
Yeah.
So if you're making requests at the meeting, you want to make sure the requests that the district can't or won't comply with.
We've got a bunch of questions in the queue. I'm not going to ask any of them or pose them right now, but I do want to pose one question. And then I'd like sort of, the three of you to talk a little bit about, sort of the process of requesting tuition reimbursement to the extent that you can. So my final question before we go into that is, does my child have to attend public school to receive reimbursement for a private special education school?
Okay, so I'll start on that one. So there was a brief period of time, at least in New Jersey, about I think it was like 2005 or 2006. There was a brief period of time where it actually said the rule there, the regs there actually said that in order to seek reimbursement, your child needed to have received special education or services from the district of residence. It didn't end up lasting. So my position on this is that there is nothing in the law that requires the student to attend the public school at any point in time in order for the parents to seek reimbursement. That being said, from so procedurally, you're clear, right? If they propose an IEP and you say, well, we're not going to accept it, we're going to unilaterally place, and you never actually have your child in the public school system. So procedurally, that's fine. Substantively, I think there are circumstances where it's possible to seek reimbursement. I think it's a very difficult case because the district at that point, like I always look at it this way, since the appropriate is reasonably calculated to provide meaningful educational benefit, it's a hypothetical. The district's taking the information that they have and they're using that information and they're coming up with something that they believe is appropriate. It's a hypothetical. Will it be? Maybe, but was reasonably calculated. And they always will make an argument in that situation of, you didn't give us a try. You didn't give it a try. And if you started and we saw that there were some issues, we would have tweaked it. We would have made the changes. Like Andy said, you would have if you gave us the neuropsych, we might have made the changes based on recommendations and things like that. And so I think it becomes a very difficult case. I say that purely from a legal perspective, though. Obviously, we all do this for a living and we're very compassionate people. I do find it very difficult to say to a family, you really should place your child into the public school, even for a period of time, a finite period of time where it could be very difficult for them. It's a family decision from a legal basis, though, from a hearing basis, which is obviously the advice that we have to give. I think it becomes very tricky for a family to prevail in that situation.
Well, the reason New Jersey and other states eliminated those requirements is because there was a Supreme Court decision,
right,
saying explicitly you don't have to be in the school system first.
Right.
But as to the second point that Paul made, it is so much better case if the kid's been in their program and the kid has failed than merely speculating that the kid's going to fail. Now, I'm not going to tell a parent that they should have a kid suffer for a year through a lousy program, but in terms of getting better reimbursement, I'd much rather have a failed program than an expert saying this program's going to fail.
Right. I mean, I think it just also depends on the intent, the severity of the disability, right? So like there's probably some clear-cut cases where it would be crazy to put your child in one of the public special education programs if you know what's available, if you have either it's maybe a child who just for whatever reason clearly needs like a one-to-one program, right? Like those, and all experts are saying that a child is so medically fragile or, so complex. And I think then, it's much.
It's unfortunate. I mean, obviously we have families that, that go through this, all the time. And it's very hard to tell someone that, their child has to go back to a program that's failing them. And, but I did it, I know what they're going through. I sent my child to school, every day for months and months and months. And I cried every day when I dropped him off because it was not, and he would, come home early or they would call me or whatever the thing was. So I know it, I feel it, but at the end of the day, like, unfortunately, it makes a better case at the end of, of this journey. And those are the things that, unfortunately, as parents, you're sort of having to weigh that and think about that, as you're going through this process. Is it possible to seek, and I lied before, this is my last question before we go into how to seek tuition reimbursement, but is it possible to seek tuition reimbursement to a non-special education school, a non-special education independent school?
Yes, yes. You have to show that it's appropriate, and that's harder. I mean, look, there's schools like Winston which are not state approved by their choice because they can't deliver the program they want to deliver if they're state approved.
Right.
And so for those, it is, it's such a strong program and a sponsor it's quite possible to demonstrate that. To demonstrate it for a complete non-special ed school.
Right. There's a difference between a Winston, which is providing a support, an integrated support for a student, or an Eagle Hill, or Villa Maria, or actually, I'm not going to say Villa Maria because they're an approved school, but a school that is a private special education school, not approved, and a private school that is like, a Brunswick or Greenwich Country Day.
Right. That's what you mean, like a non-specialized.
Those are the differences that we're trying to parse out. So can you three talk about, I'm a parent, I've unilaterally placed my child, or I want to unilaterally place my child at a private special education school. What are the steps that I should follow in order to, number one, preserve my right for tuition reimbursement and start that process?
Well, look, you have a notice requirement. You have to provide 10 days in advance notice. Give either by 10 days in advance or at a PPT/CSE meeting. You have to provide notice.
You have to give notice to your public school that you are pulling your child out of public school and intend to seek possible funding. Yeah,
seek reimbursement, and that's the procedural requirement. But
and when does that have to be done?
If you're 10 days in advance.
10 days in advance. So just to reiterate for the parents on the call.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
There's different interpretations in different states, so in different jurisdictions. So just to be clear about this, that there's certain places where it's stricter than in others. So the requirement, and I will tell you, there are plenty of states. There's even some federal case law on this, where even though the law says the federal the federal law and the corresponding state regulations say that it can be at, let's say, at the IEP table, just incorporate all jurisdictions, you can give notice there, or you can do it by giving 10 business days notice. There have been plenty of federal courts that have said that it's so easy to give notice in writing that you really should always do it in writing. And I will tell you that there are stricter rules on this in certain places, where some places, like I know in the city, that this is the case where it's like you do it 10 business days before the school year starts. But the reality of it is that, and because of the whole purpose of the rule, is that you really should give notice 10 business days prior to making the commitment to the private school program. Because the idea behind the rule is that you're notifying the district you disagree with their program, and you're unilaterally placing because of that disagreement. And then the district, even though it's a brief period of time, is supposed to react to that. And what are the concerns? And let's go through them. If the family has already committed to the private school program
by signing a contract,
right, and if there's no out clause or anything like that, right, they're fully committed, let's say,
put down a deposit, the whole thing,
right, you'll see,
paid more than just a deposit usually, right,
right. And then you'll see in the case law that it says the family wasn't cooperating. You'll get hurt on the equitable considerations prong 3 there, because it's a fait accompli. You're telling the district you disagree with their program, right? The family's telling the district they disagree with the program, but they've already made the decision on a unilateral placement. That gives the district no opportunity to address the concerns. Now, 9 times out of 10 in that 14-day period, the 10 business day period, the district's not addressing the concerns anyway. But If they can show that the family committed to the program already and didn't even give them the chance, the district will use that to its advantage. And you just don't want that. You don't want the district to have that advantage. So it's better to give notice sooner rather than later.
Okay, I don't disagree with that as strategy. As a matter of law, the requirement is 10 days before the placement.
Mhm. So what then? What happens then?
It's 10 days before you commit. I would say, like, because
that's not what the law says, though. That's all. I mean, I think it's good advice to do it as early as possible. Then you have 2 years to file the due process action. You don't have to do it immediately.
Mhm.
Let me say a couple things here. One, there's something called the snapshot rule, which the question is whether the IEP proposed was appropriate at the time it was proposed based on the information available. And so the fact that your kid couldn't read in the public school and could read after spending 3 months at Windward is not usually admissible for the purpose of proving the inappropriateness of the school program.
Mhm.
Right? That really sucks. But
Mhm.
that
Right,
is law.
right. Because that's what we hear a lot is, the kid never didn't read for 4 years, but now he's at Windward or Eagle Hill and he's reading. So ergo, this must be the appropriate program.
And that's why you really need that expert, right? To
Exactly.
connect the dots. No? Are we?
In advance.
The expert will be like, because obviously, I mean,
It's got to be what was known at the time that
right, was known at, was there enough information before the IEP team and to show that, the student needed this and that it wasn't provided. Right.
So ideally you would give your notice, and that you are, you would like to, preserve your right to seek tuition reimbursement. You're placing your child at this school, unilaterally. You would also, at the same time, already have an evaluation that has been completed about your child that reflects that the current environment at the public school, that the IEP is inappropriate, and that's why you're choosing to place the child in, whatever alternative school. And regardless of when you choose to seek tuition reimbursement, whether it's 3 months in, 6 months in, or 2 year or before the 2 year mark that Annie spoke about, you want to have that evaluation reflect the time that you place the child. Is that correct?
No, you want the evaluation available to the IEP team.
Yes.
Right, at the time before you.
Yeah, if it's not, I mean, I've had cases where an evaluation done subsequent to the IEP is not even admissible.
Mhm.
Right. The ideal case would be like a neuropsychologist had evaluated a child prior to the IEP meeting, for the year at issue in which they were planning. And the neuropsychologist recommended a full-time specialized school as the essential appropriate placement, specialized reading. And then the district recommends a general ed class with one pullout, a day for reading. And then you have this a clear case where the expert opinion was ignored or, was rejected based on what the district felt they could provide. And then you have the expert who can testify about their participation at the meeting, their opinions were not followed, and then they can compare the district program to the private school program, and then so that expert can then speak to that first prong of inappropriateness and the second prong of why is the private school appropriate. But right, they need to have evaluated the child while they weren't doing well and made their opinion known, or else it's like too late.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would agree with that. And look, I mean, there are other things happen, right? Like families will have evaluations done in the fall because they're concerned about their child, and they and then the district adjusts and things like that, or they come to us and you start,
Right.
the situation can be different for every family. But I would say that from a like if we were sort of like in a perfect world, if we could kind of dictate the timeline, the idea is you get the evaluation done in the spring, right, and then you present it to your, we'll just call it the IEP team.
Mhm.
Right? They don't follow the recommendations, or they don't follow them in full, And then you're getting, and you get the IEP, and then you're rejecting that IEP, and you're giving notice of unilateral placement, all that, because then you've gone through here's my expert report, here's the information, or here's at that point, my evaluation report, here's this information. The IEP team, the district's IEP team is saying, we don't agree with this, or we can't, there's only so much we can do, or whatever they're saying. And then the family's saying, well, we considered what the IEP that you proposed was, we considered it in good faith, and now we're going to unilaterally place into a private school. That's the steps you really would like to have. Doesn't always work out that way. Some of it's because the availability of evaluators. It can be very difficult.
Right. It's probably worth like mentioning that sometimes if you're even thinking about getting your child evaluated, you should contact them as soon as you
I do this all the
think.
time. It's, it's like, most of them are running a,
Months,
3-month, 4-month, 5-month waiting list. And then after that, you're talking about the amount of time that it will take to schedule the testing on your child, possibly the school observation, if there is one, and then to write up the report. You could be talking about a 9-month period of time before you see a piece of paper or pieces of paper, with the recommendations on it. So the minute that you're thinking about possibly needing evaluation, just call someone and get on their list, or call 5 people and get on their list and see, who comes up first.
One thing I want to make clear is you do not want the evaluator recommending a specific school.
Right.
But the evaluator recommending a school that has the following characteristics.
Right.
And, and hopefully that dovetails with the school you're placing.
Right.
Yeah.
Much stronger,
right, because then that kills your prong 3 of your case. It shows that the family was never really willing to look at a public school, that they were only focused on X school and not the type of program that the child needed.
I want to bring up one more issue, which I think we're seeing change. About half states now have voucher programs where you can get a check to place your kid wherever you want. 2 things about voucher programs. The amount of the vouchers are infinitesimal in comparison to the cost of a decent private program, first. And second, you give up all your IDEA rights to do that. And so, there are really downsides to that. But with the incoming Trump administration, I think there's a real possibility of a substantial spread in voucher programs to northeastern states, and so that's something to be aware of. When you place your child unilaterally, it is attacking a IEP that exists for 1 year. It is the duty of the school to have an annual review and to propose a program for the next year. And so you're still within the jurisdiction of that school, and do not fall for the trick that a lot of districts are trying to pull to make you withdraw and make it a private placement. And
right.
so
right, you'll get forms from them that will trick you, right?
And that that preserves your rights under the IDEA to continue to be offered a free, appropriate public education in a restrictive environment.
Yeah, do not sign the forms that say you're withdrawing your child from school.
Yep.
Do not sign those forms.
Go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, a settlement agreement may provide that, but that is one reason why a settlement agreement, even if you negotiate it yourself, really ought to be reviewed by a lawyer and ought to go over with you what rights you're giving up.
Absolutely.
And just on that, I just really quickly, in most New York districts, most New York suburban districts, even if when there's unilateral placement, the districts still send out, it's just, it's automatic. They send out a form saying, do you want to have an annual review? Do you want to seek an IESP from the district of location? I haven't seen that. Andy, I don't know if you have. I haven't seen that as much in Connecticut, where they are sort of volunteering, hey, you need to have an annual review, or you're up for an annual review and we want to offer to you. The New York districts are much more proactive about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's much worse in Connecticut. We now have
that's what I thought. Yeah,
CT SEDS, which in fact, if you don't work it right, there's a real dispute about this, but we're getting reports from lots of districts that if there's a unilateral placement, you're just kicked out of CT SEDS and your name doesn't come up again in a year.
That's what I'm. Yep.
Now the state takes the position that that's not true, and that you go into inactive status and should kick back in. That's something we'll continue to work with the software.
Good. Yeah, that's.
So I think like Yeah, I would say a tip for the parents out there, if you get a form with like 4 boxes that comes from your home's own public school, just be cautious. Sometimes the language of one of the boxes is there might not be a correct box. So if for example you want you're placing your child privately doesn't mean that you don't want an IEP with your home district. You
Right.
need to have the IEP and challenge it.
Right.
You have a case to sue. So
Right.
the best advice would just be if you get one of these forms that asks you now for your plan for next year, you should send it to someone who can give you advice because how you fill that out could potentially ruin a case for a tuition reimbursement.
Absolutely.
And one other thing on that, make sure you return the form because one of the things that we have is districts coming back to us saying, we sent the 3 notices to the family. They never responded. So we figured we were done and we never held a meeting. And so so make sure you do get that advice and make sure you do return the form.
Mm-hmm.
On that issue, my first piece of advice is you need an expert. There's no exceptions. My second piece of advice is do not say that I never want my kid to return to public school.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the corollary of that, it is not all about the money. It is not all about the money.
Mm-hmm.
There's strong pressure on school districts to have in-district programs, to have kids in district. I'm not sure it's like legal pressure, but it is clearly felt. And so it is often the case that when we go through a mediation, the district wants some sort of commitment from the parents that they'll consider an in-district program next year. Saying no comes with a high cost.
Mm-hmm. You always want to look reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say that I hope this fixes the kid. I hope that
Right.
we can put together an appropriate program in the future.
Right.
And as a general rule, your child is under the jurisdiction of that school system for 15, 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it does not make a lot of sense to burn bridges. This is a business proposition. This is not a matter of anger. You may dislike them, you may distrust them, but boy, showing that does not lead to good outcomes.
Right. It's like a co-parenting arrangement that has to last for until the child is 18 or in many cases 22, so it doesn't behoove you to blow it up, when, the kid's 7, because you're going to have to work with that same school district for, the balance of their, educational career, at least their, like pre-secondary educational career. This is really helpful. I think that, we've covered a lot of ground, really, really interesting ground, and, hopefully given parents like a snapshot of the tuition reimbursement process. I apologize that we cannot explore, each and every one of the questions that you all have asked, or that we can't explore tuition reimbursement to the in depth as we might have wanted to. Maybe I should have done the whole webinar on tuition reimbursement. It's a little too late for that now. But anyway, switching gears to transportation. Now, this is actually a really, really interesting interesting topic, the topic of transportation. It's a question we get all the time, and for a lot of families, it can be the single biggest obstacle to to a lot of families in a successful special education journey, particularly if your child's been placed in a school outside of their home school or outside of your home district. So can you all talk a little bit about transportation, like from to and from school, sort of the legal background behind it, and and I'm realizing that it differs from district to district, typically how are students transported to and from their home school, and then let's expand from there.
I'll let you go first, Paul.
Okay. So for transportation within a district, right? When you're talking about just transporting students within, from their home to their public school, it does vary from district to district. There are rules in each state about the mileage and things like that, about when they have to provide transportation. That sort of falls outside. I mean, it's important for people to know, and people probably realize that from their own districts. but it's a general education issue, that part of it, how they're getting transported. The special education part of it is if you're being transported to your school and you need specialized transportation of some sort from your home to the school, that's in your IEP. It's a related transportation is a related service, and that's in your IEP. So that's right in there. It's something, frankly, we don't really see too much as like that comes up much in the way of dispute. There are other items that we'll talk about, I'm sure, that involve disputes in special education and transportation. But getting to and from the school never really, these are all pretty small districts, and that's never really much of a concern. I mean, sometimes there is a concern about, should there be an aide on the bus and things like that. But for the most part, I've found districts to be pretty good about providing the specialized transportation to students.
Let me just add two things. One, if for a kid with an IEP, the district's on the hook to provide transportation from home to school and school to home. And if that's whether that's general or specialized, they're required to provide that transportation. If the district places the child at a private school, they're also required to provide transportation to and from school. I will tell you that can be hideously expensive. I've seen kids transported from Stanford to Trumbull with bills of $35,000-$40,000 a year for the transportation.
That's really important for families to understand, because I get a lot of, I get questions where families are like, we have this and we're just asking for transportation, to the, from Stanford to Norwalk or whatever it is. It's not just transportation, it's an entirely different animal, and it's an expensive animal. And as Andy's saying,
it's liability too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in negotiating, and in Connecticut, if you attend, even as a private placement, a nonprofit school within the same school district, the district's required to provide transportation, a not-for-profit school. A strange distinction, but it goes back to 1965, but I won't go into that. In negotiations or cost-sharing arrangements, parents sometimes want and sometimes really, really need transportation.
Mm-hmm.
We are successful in getting transportation if the district already has a bus going to that neighborhood, which doesn't often happen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if the district's cooperative and everybody's aggressive, we can work out something with a neighboring district on transportation to provide it. But as a general rule, getting transportation is nearly impossible. Always in our demand, we put in the cost of transportation, which is the IRS business rate, and it's usually 2 round trips a day, so it adds up to a fairly substantial number. And sometimes, if it's pretty much full amount, we'll get it. But often we'll go in with $62,000 worth of transportation and $6,000 worth of $62,000 worth of tuition and $6,000 worth of reimbursement for transportation for 68, and we'll settle for 50. So and dollars are fungible. You could use it for tuition. You could use them for transportation. Carpooling, that's districts, will try to work down the numbers if you're in a carpool and you're driving 1 day a week, for example. There's all sorts of permutations on that, but from the district point of view, it's an enormous cost and liability issue to provide transportation, and it's a big ask. And asking for tuition is usually an easier ask than asking for transportation.
But at the same time, if your child's attending like a private special education school with where there already is a bus going, and many students are coming from your district, and you have an IEP, you'll probably be routed on the bus, right? And in that case, though, you have to ask for it still, though, right? There's usually I
It's
mean,
easier in that case,
it's
it's
easier in
easier
that
in
case,
that
right?
case.
But
Than
It's
if
an
there's
IE.
no bus, then establishing a new bus to a school that does from a district that doesn't bus to a particular school for
If
sure.
there's, but if it's an IEP placement, they have to provide transportation. There's just no
oh, you're
question.
talking about an IEP placement. I'm talking
No, no,
about, sorry, a unilateral placement where the parent places privately and then wants the bus to that school.
That's a really a tough one.
Mhm.
Well, that's a lot of kids, you know.
Well,
So
it's a-
right now we're focusing on, you're saying the CSE placed. Okay.
so
Because they're different.
well, but there's a distinction here, right, with Connecticut and New York.
Right,
Right,
exactly.
that too.
Really, really important one.
Yeah. Let's
So
talk about New York for a second.
Yeah, so New
Yeah.
York, there are two laws that allow for transportation. The first one
Okay.
is that if you are placing your child in a private school,
Right,
you can put in there's an April 1st
Yep.
deadline.
right.
To
You put in
request
your
it.
form, you get transportation, period. And so as long as it's within 15
15
miles.
miles.
Okay. Now, if your child has an IEP and if you place into a private school, I'm going to say place because it doesn't have to be a unilateral placement. It could just be you're placing your child into a private
You're
school.
attending. Yeah. You're attending.
Right. If it's within 50 miles of the home, then the district is required to provide transportation if the if the private school program basically follows the student's special education program. So
Mhm.
this is it's like when Andy's talking before about how to
Right.
define appropriate and things
Right.
like
There's
that.
lots of interpretation.
There's a lot of things and it never used to be a fight. And again, if you put in your form by April 1st, none of this matters to a family. And so families out there, if you're within 15 miles and you get your form in by April 1st, you don't have to think about this.
Mhm.
But for other families, if you're beyond the 15 miles, but within 50 miles, or if you don't even know your child's going to go to a private school until July and you're
Mhm.
after the deadline, you can the what I like to say is that the special education school, the private school, basically has to follow the basic tenets of the IEP, right? And when I go into meetings to fight for this, these fights usually takes place in August. It's about the goals and objectives. You look at the goals and objectives and you say, okay, these are the goals and objectives that the district, CSE in this case, has set. Is the private school, are they working on the same things? And they pretty much it's always going to be, there's going to be some commonality there.
Mhm.
Um, Districts never really pushed back on that before. They pushed back on it more, I guess, during and I guess post pandemic because gas prices were so high and still are. Getting drivers was difficult. It still is. Transportation is very expensive, right? One thing I want to add to all of this is that, Andy said and Lara said, it's a big ask. The transportation piece is a big ask. One thing to keep in mind that works, I like to think for the parents' advantage is we talked before, if a district agrees to place your child out of district, right, they have to provide transportation. We just talked about what a big expense that is for them. That could be an enormous expense. It could be the tuition and the transportation. If you then unilaterally place into a non-approved private school, it can help you in a negotiation to say, well, geez, it would have cost the district $60,000 to place in a private school or a BOCES program. It would have cost them 35 or 40,000. We're looking to negotiate for the place that we've unilaterally placed. And let's say you're not looking for transportation. That's a good negotiating point. It's a good place to be because transportation costs the district so much money now. And so it can be useful in that way. And I think sometimes families don't realize how expensive it really is for a district to place out a district.
And to bus out of district.
The combination of tuition and transportation is
yeah.
very difficult. It's a lot of money that can help in a negotiation. Of course, on the flip side, they push back on out of district placements.
What about things like mileage, gas, are those things that, can be negotiated with a district? So say your child has an out of district placement, between 15 miles and 50 miles or whatever in New York. or, just in Connecticut outside of, the originating school district. What are, some alternatives that might, if you have to drive your child to and from school to this, special education school that's out of your district, what are some things that, you might be available, avail yourself of to, offset that expense?
Winning lotto.
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right, Andy? I mean, I think you would agree. It's like
Yeah, so I mean, we ask for mileage,
we
for
ask for
that.
mileage. Yeah.
That's the IRS rate, and so sometimes get it. Parents sometimes form their own little bus companies,
Absolutely.
and provide the transportation.
I got on a bus. There was a child that was going to my son's school, and they were from New York, and it was so the New York, it was in the child settlement agreement to bus the child to bus to this school, but it wasn't a district bus. It was a private bus. And so I called the private bus company and said, what do I have to pay you to pick up my child, on the way to the school? And they were like, X dollars, which was a manageable amount. And that's what we did. And sometimes you have to get really creative in some ways to figure out how to get your child to school. And if you have the means to do that, and or you can sit in the parking lot like I did for a week and stalk the buses that were coming and going.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, you ask for mileage. That's what you do. I mean,
Yeah.
this is like when we're in mediation, when we're in settlement discussions, the mileage is, especially because the rate goes up every year, obviously, and you're talking about 4 trips.
Mhm.
Yeah, put that out there, and if the family if there's a carpool,
Mhm.
then we provide. Hey, our family's driving 2 times a week, so there's 4 round trips for them. This is their mileage, and we parse it out that way.
Mhm.
Well,
Does it hurt
this is a
families
big
to carpool? Is it like, should they not carpool, or it doesn't really matter?
up to them.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that, if it's a state approved school, that means there are IEP kids placed there.
Right.
That means that some districts are providing transportation.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
sitting in the parking lot and seeing where buses are coming from is a pretty good way to figure out how to get on one of those buses.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So that's a real advantage of a state approved school. There are no IEP placements at an unapproved school as a general rule.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so
Is there a similar transport, like the 15-mile transport rule in Connecticut as New York? No, I didn't think so.
no, just IEP placements and within district for nonprofit schools.
Is
You
it
had
worth
asked about
mentioning? Oh, yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, is it worth, it might also be worth mentioning that, like Paul was saying, that special ed transportation is a related service on an IEP. For many families who need transportation, like that is the deal breaker.
Yeah.
Coming from a school perspective, some advice that we've given to families is not, get special ed transportation checked off on your IEP. And how does that necessarily happen? Not if you're, I'm talking not about CSE place students. I'm just saying if you have an IEP, you're going to be maybe placing your child privately, but they can't get there without a bus. How can I get my child to qualify for special ed transportation? Especially even in some of the New York suburban districts, they have some of the city school districts, for example, have their own rules. And the only way to have peace of mind that your child's going to get a bus door to door is to have it checked off. And so one piece of advice we've given to families when it's appropriate is having your child's recommended for special ed transportation because of a medical diagnosis. It could be something like anxiety or ADHD, but if you can provide medical documentation to get special ed transportation kind of checked off, that could put you in the running for door-to-door busing. And it's just extra, it's like, right, it's just one more guarantee that your child's going to get door-to-door special ed transportation. I just think that is something that a lot of parents need to know about and know that is an option. And when there is some kind of medical documentation that can help you out, it's just more assurance that your child's getting there by the district. Do you see that, Paul? I mean, do you guys, does
Sure.
that
Yeah. I
come
mean,
up
I
from,
like anything that's extra, anything that helps the family.
right?
Again, we don't, because in most of the New York suburban districts,
You just
um,
said it.
we
Yeah.
don't end up with a fight over that, but it can be. And I warn every family it can be. So yeah, I mean, anything extra that we can get. And I would just add, because I know somebody had a question about this, and Christine brought it up, just because I don't want the families to be nervous about this, the carpooling piece of it, like along what Andy said also. I mean, do what you have to do to get your kid get your child to the school. Like
Yeah.
you know, even if you're carpooling and if that's the way that you can make the transportation work because it's such a burden, do it. Right? Figure out whatever you have to do because it is so difficult for families, it's so costly. And if we're seeking reimbursement, like I said, we could still parse it out and figure out. I had one recently. I was in a mediation where we were trying to figure out how much money it would have been. And what we did, we just undercut it. We like the families thought that maybe they had provided 80 of the trips. So we said to the district, the family thinks they provided 80 of the trips, but our ask is for 70. So that there's no, and we're going to do that. We're going to ask that way because we're being reasonable
Right.
and we can't tell exactly. And
And that's an important thing to, to note here, particularly when we're talking about, I mean, this whole call is, we have talked a little bit about IEP placements, but, broadly speaking, the whole call has been about, a placement that has occurred outside of a CSE or PPT meeting.
Right.
That's what a tuition reimbursement case, sort of is. And we're talking largely about transportation outside of an IEP, because if it was an IEP placement, you would have the transportation already. So I think it's important to,
Right.
to note that in these processes where we're talking about, tuition and reimbursement and transportation, all of this stuff is negotiating. You're throwing all of these things on the table and hoping that the school's going to give you some of it. The district's going to give you some of it, whether it's 80% of the tuition or 60% of the tuition or 50% of the tuition with some transportation or whatever it is. I mean, I'm getting questions on the, on the chat that's like, we have, we have mileage one way, but mileage not the other way, and it's, and a lot of this is sort of how you're going to manage the negotiating process, of what you're asking for and what you're willing to, to give up in order to get what's most important for you.
Well, the other side of that is for a family that's considering um, a unilateral placement at a private school, if transportation is absolutely essential for them, they really ought to think twice about making that placement.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting transportation is really unusual.
Yeah. That's a really important point to make, absolutely. Is
I
that
can usually get some form of cost sharing, if there's a
Mhm.
decent case there. But getting transportation, almost never.
I have a question from the audience. I'm going to pose a couple more questions, and then with respect to our time and our panelists, we're going to close. But during negotiations, is it, ever a strategy, can you tell the district that you give up the transportation in exchange for a higher percentage of the tuition? Is that a strategy that you've
All the
employed?
time, all the time.
Mhm.
I mean, it's
Very
not, and in fact, look, I go into a mediation. Most of these are settled in mediation in Connecticut.
Yeah.
I go in with a total, usually asking for 2 years tuition plus summer school plus
Plus lawyers' fees,
plus
plus the
plus plus
evaluation.
cost
Yeah.
for the
Mhm.
transportation.
Yeah.
Asking,
Plus all the therapy you spent and the time that you were, doing this, yeah.
yeah, and that's my total ask, and the district comes back with the sort of per pupil as their first offer, and we work towards some sort of middle position, and the size of that middle position is really, as I say, a result of how likely the district thinks that you're going to go to a hearing and they're going to lose.
Mhm. That's really, really helpful.
And also
Um,
how much the staff wants to get rid of the kid.
right. Or the parent in some cases. Anyway. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I know that we didn't explore either of these topics in nearly the depth that they deserve. Obviously, I've said, many times actually over the course of the past few years that we could do an entire webinar on transportation. And of course, I didn't do one. I did half of one. But thank you again so much, Andy, Paul, and Lara, for joining us this evening, for delving into these really, really difficult and complicated issues with us. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to everyone who registered for this session, as well as on our Facebook page at the end of the week. And I thank you all so much for joining.
Can I do one shameless plug?
Absolutely. I love shameless plugs.
Tomorrow
Is
night.
it for tomorrow? Is it for Ross Green tomorrow?
Ross Green tomorrow night.
Fabulous.
Seek this week.
Fabulous. Ross Green is a
Green.
tremendous speaker, and Seek is really fortunate to have him on, to talk tomorrow night. So
yeah,
Seek
and in fact, I said to Ross, look, I don't do cream puff interviews. Give me the charges that you face from schools who are rejecting your approach. And so he sent me a list of the way more hostile questions than I would ever ask myself.
Oh,
so
excellent.
He's gonna explain, how he answers those questions.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining us. Everyone be well. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.